I'm going to be talking to Eddy Perez, who is the International Climate Diplomacy Manager for the Climate Action Network Canada, about the announcement that was made on the weekend while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was at the G7 summit in Cornwall, England, about $5.3 billion to support international climate finance. So welcome to the interview, Eddy.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, look, what's your take on this? Climate finance is a growing field. It's a green finance, sustainable finance. It goes under a lot of different descriptions. And it's generally agreed there's not enough of it. So I would imagine that the announcement was welcome. Is it enough?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is we need to congratulate the Canadian government for this bold move. There are many reasons why this announcement is very significant. The first one is because it happens at a moment where Canada needs to revise their international climate finance obligations for the next cycle, so the 2021-2025 cycle. The second one is because climate finance is a matter of trust, and I'll go deeper into that thought later on. Why, even if the number is low, this is such an important issue. And the third one is because it is significant for Canada to do this doubling. Back in 2017, Canada was the lowest climate finance contributor of all G7 countries. And, you know, beyond the technicalities of the number, the allocation, adaptation, or mitigation, climate finance is also a foreign policy priority and a political priority. A doubling shows that recognition, that there's room for Canada's foreign policy priorities, to actually tackle this issue and make it at the core of Canada's participation globally.
Well, let's talk about trust. What did you mean by this is important to reestablishing trust?
Yeah. So the 100 billion is a commitment that was made in 2009. We're talking about 11 years ago, and it was essentially a commitment that was meant to be the minimum, and then understanding that the needs of countries in the global south were increasing both in adaptation and mitigation. The 100 billion represented just the start. And the commitment was reach 100 billion in 2020, and then from 2021 to 2025, make the 100 billion the norm. And then in 2025, increase it, surpass it beyond, and let's negotiate another climate finance goal. So the fact that up until today, it is uncertain that the 100 billion is going to be met remains a huge concern. So that's why even if this commitment from the Canadian government is significant at this G7 context, it is nonetheless problematic that all the other G7 countries were not able to step up to the level of ambition that is required. Beyond Canada and Germany, who were the two countries who really put money on the table, and the UK, who has already doubled, the US still needs to catch up, Italy still needs to catch up, and to say the least, there are so other countries in the EU that need to catch up, and that needs to happen before COP26.
Now, I did an interview before, late 2020 with Professor Johannes Urpilainen from Johns Hopkins as an expert in climate finance. And he was saying that the US has fallen way, way behind China. China has used climate finance as part of its Belt and Road Initiative to tie some of the Asian countries into its economic sphere. And very often, not always, but very often, these are going for coal plants. And so President Biden, during his campaign and after, has pledged to counter that and to bring the U.S. back, compete basically with China, bring it back to, even. And so are these kind of commitments part of that conversation, or is this a different conversation?
Yeah, I think the conversations, they have similarities, but they remain two different conversations, because the 100 billion per se, what it is a commitment from global north countries, from high emitting countries. These countries that are responsible for the climate crisis, they in 2009 made this commitment and have not been able to deliver. So before speaking, any new finance that Canada puts on the table in the context of the 100 billion does not need to be seen as transformational. It's just the obligation. We're just talking about upholding what these countries agreed on in 2009. When it comes to the point that you just mentioned about China, the Belt and Road Initiative, it's a Titanic project. I think it's something like 12 times the Marshall Plan when it comes to total investments. And essentially the G7 summit G7 countries tried to counter that with another idea, the Build Back Better for the World B3W strategy. Which essentially is an idea that was also championed by Biden at this first G7 summit. The problem with the B3W is that it has not much details, and it doesn't actually respond to all the uncertainties that developing countries are facing when it comes to the decarbonization of their economy. So, all to say, it is important to provide alternatives, but at the same time, we need to distinguish the 100 billion, that obligation, with the new ideas that these G7 countries are putting on the table.
Maybe you could clarify something for me, Eddy. And I don't know, this is probably not the right word to describe the 5.3 billion as part of the 100 billion as part of an aid package, climate finance aid package, but I don't know what else to call it. So you can clarify that for me. But to distinguish it from commercial climate finance, which I understand is what the Build Back Better initiative is that kind of, we've got an obligation that the G7 countries have committed to the southern nations, which is entirely separate from commercial climate finance lending. Is that a correct distinction?
Yeah, so I think in the context of climate finance per se, there's no single definition. We can't say this project is climate finance and this project is not climate finance. But there are a couple of norms when it comes to what could be considered as funding that is climate the first climate related development. And so when we speak about that in the context of the 100 billion, just to give you a bit of a quick overview of it, it's structured into three pieces, right? 100 billion, 37.3% comes from development aid. So Canada's ODA, Germany's ODA, and so on. There is 27 billion that comes from the multilateral development banks. They finance with the money that donor countries give to these MDBs projects. And then there is a private sector mobilization, which is that from every public investment, there is private co-finance that happens at the recipient country. And so that is the way the 100 billion is structured. Then, of course, in many ways, the way in which we account for it globally gets blurry because there are different methodologies and ways in which we could put this on a table. That to say, there is an understanding that there are two instruments that are really important when it comes to climate finance. The first one is providing funds through grants and prioritizing climate development projects. And the second one is, if you're providing a loan, it has to be concessional. There needs to be concessions so that the way in which these loans are paid back don't represent a burden to countries in the global south, particularly low income countries, small island developing states, and least developed countries. So all to say, when it comes to the 100 billion, those kind of norms are always there. The balance between adaptation and mitigation, the use of the proper institutions from the UN, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and to a certain extent, even the Climate Investment Fund, that have mandates to provide climate financing in a way that is simple to the developing countries. And so when it comes to other other types of climate finance, there are other different types of rules that apply. But in the context of the 100 billion, those types of norms were agreed because we knew that there needed to be enabling environments for these flows to actually reach the poorest and most vulnerable.
Very interesting insights, Eddy. Any final thoughts?
I mean, just to say that I think Canada made an important pledge. But again, I mean, COP26 is a matter of trust. And it's not just about Canada's pledge. It's about all developed countries to come forward and fill up that gap of the 100 billion, so that then we can start talking about those new initiatives as being new, as being transformational. Because how could you speak about something new if you're not even able to finish what you committed to 11, 12 years ago? And that's where we are right now.
Great. Eddy, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.